Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second installation of You Say You Want a Revolution, Jewish Encounters with Radical Change. I'm Ellie Gettinger, Director of Outreach for the Center for Lifelong Learning, and I'm really delighted to have you here with us today. A book I read recently, it was called Or What You Will, and it's by the author Joe Walton, explored the moment before the print revolution. The author describes this as the following. The monks preserved the works of antiquity as a side effect, copying them by hand and passing them on hand to hand. They didn't know the Renaissance was coming, that eager hands would be waiting to take them up. Nobody ever knows what's coming. It's easy to lose sight of that looking backwards, when it all has the air of inevitability. But the future is lying before the people of the past. It was just as dark and impossible to penetrate as your future is to you. And I think about this as we are considering this moment. And today, our presenter, Dr. Marcus Mordecai Schwartz, goes by Morty, will be presenting 3 manuscripts that are part of a large collection of manuscripts that are on display at the Grolier Club in New York. And it is really this moment, this time capsule of what happens before books are widely accessible. How is this utilized? How does this change Jewish culture? And what does this culture look like before this moment? I can't wait to hear from him, and I think he has some pretty revolutionary things to share with us today. Thank you so much for many of you have contributed to be part of this series. We so appreciate it. We do offer sponsorship levels. They come in 3 levels. You can find that on our website, and there'll be a post in the chat if you'd like to sponsor a series, you can sponsor in honor of a loved one or a specific event. It's a great way to share JTS learning with the larger world. So today we are talking about before the print revolution manuscripts in the world they made. And as I said, these manuscripts, the 3 that we're going to be exploring, are part of over 120 or 120, that's the number, that are in this exhibit at the Grolier Club. And we're so excited to have him give some insight. The library is just one of Morty's many functions at JTS. He's the Rip Schnitzer Librarian for Special Collections. He's also an assistant professor of Talmud and Rabbinics. He writes extensively. He responds extensively. He helps curate exhibits. He deals with books and rights and collections. And there's so many aspects to the world in which, so we're just delighted that Morty could take time out of his schedule to give us, this national audience, a moment with this exhibit. And hopefully some of you will have the opportunity to go check it out while it's on display. And I know there are some virtual opportunities, I think, with it, but I'll leave that to my colleague to explore. There'll be time for questions. You're going to share your questions with me, and I will share them with Dr. Schwartz. And then there's also, if you have a technical issue, please message my colleague, Tani Schwartz-Herman. We're going to share the sources in the chat so you can have access to them. If you want to look at the images on your own screen and make them larger, then you have that capability. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Marcus Mordecai Schwartz. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ellie. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity. I want to say 2 things before we put the images and the texts up on the screen. Number 1, I just want to emphasize that the exhibit that's at the Grolier Club right now, Illuminating Jewish Worlds, which runs through early January, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's JTS's largest exhibit since 1963, when we exhibited many of these same illuminated manuscripts at the Jewish Museum. And that was a really groundbreaking exhibit at the time, putting so many Hebrew illuminated manuscripts in the same location. And this is an even larger exhibition. So I don't think that it's going to happen. How long ago? I believe 1963 was 60 years ago. Do I have that right? And so I don't imagine there'll be another exhibit like this for another 60 years. So it's worth flying into New York. It really is worth flying into New York if you live somewhere else, making a trip and coming and seeing it, because it's not going to happen anytime soon again. I should also say that we are opening in coming days. I don't know exactly when. After the Grolier Club exhibit ends, we are going to be opening a permanent website, which is going to have many of our illuminated manuscripts, and you'll be able to view those then. This is not an official announcement. This is an unofficial sneak peek of coming attractions. So you should know that such a thing is actually coming, and you'll be able to spend time with these materials later on as well. The last thing that I'm going to say, and I promise we're going to jump into these materials, is that I am available to you. If there are questions that you have coming out of this presentation or coming out of the exhibit, or if you want a tour of the exhibit, or if you have a question that you want answered by email or by phone, please email me, or which is I am moschwartz@jtsa.edu, or specialcollections@jtsa.edu for my colleague Andrew Katz, who also sends questions my way. And I am happy. I answer lots of reference questions, do lots of reference interviews, do lots of tours. And so I'm available to you as a resource, and you should not feel afraid or hesitate to reach out to me. Okay, now let's go ahead and put up the material. Fantastic. So what you have on the screen in front of you is a title page. Title pages did not exist in manuscript. This is not a title page of the manuscript. This is a title page of today's presentation. The page you see, which looks like to you a title page, it's a title image, it's an arch page, and arch pages were used in the age of printing as title pages. That's not a title. What you have in front of you is instead what's called an insipt. It is the beginning of a liturgical poem. This poem is Melech Azur Vura, and it is the liturgical poem that's inserted into the first blessing before the recitation of Shema on the morning of Rosh Hashanah. It is often still recited in Orthodox synagogues on the morning of Rosh Hashanah. But very often, even Orthodox synagogues today, Ashkenazic Orthodox synagogues, will omit this particular poem. However, it was a standard liturgical poem. And in fact, the machzors in the Middle Ages, and this is a really good example of the difference between print and manuscript. The machzors in the Middle Ages generally did not include the standard prayers or abbreviated them, giving only the liturgical poems, the special insertions. And what's the reason for that? Because if you're writing out a book by hand, which was the only way of writing out a book in the period, it costs time, money, parchment, and ink in order to be able to write those things out. And if you had the texts memorized, there was no reason to actually write them down. What's the point of an arch page like this? I think a lot of the illumination in liturgical manuscripts serves the function that we now serve in print by counting up the pages, how much is left before the services are over. The feeling of stress you have of like, how much longer do I actually have to wait until the service is over? That was also accomplished in the Middle Ages. It was accomplished by having particular illuminations at particular points. If your particular synagogue had a machzor that had particular illuminated images at particular points, particular illustrations at particular points, you would know how much longer things were going to be from year to year during the high holiday period. It's possible, by the way, to both enjoy services and also want to know how long it's going to be until they're over. Those are not things that are actually mutually exclusive. In fact, they often find companionship together in our experience at the synagogue. So I'm going to come back to this image. I'm not going to talk about it extensively now because I want to move on and I want to talk about more of today's presentation. So let's go on to the next page. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about a kind of a framing, assumptions that you need to know, sort of before we move in to have our conversation. First of all, the thing to remember, and I've already sort of introduced this idea, is that things are transmitted by Jews just like everybody else in the world, but especially by Jews, through either hand, meaning they would write out books by hand, or mouth, meaning they had memorized texts, memorized ways of conveying culture, songs, often poetry, liturgical poetry that was recited on a regular basis. For instance, every Shabbat, for instance, El Adon was a good example of that. Things that people memorized, that they had memorized and then didn't need to be included. So when we're talking about liturgical manuscripts, that's one kind of memorized text. But there are also a whole sets of assumptions that are memorized assumptions that don't need to be explained. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I'm just getting that idea out there. But if you want a book, the only way it was to actually write them out by hand. The next idea that's an assumption that we kind of have to get out of our heads is the idea of scriptoria. I know that Ellie started by talking about a book that describes monks in a scriptorium. And in fact, that was very common during the Middle Ages for Latin and Greek texts. There would be a scriptorium in a particular monastery, and monks would sit at tables, and there would be one dictating at the front, and then those monks would write out copies of books that would then go into the library of the monastery. You can actually see a scene like this in Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, and it's a really good and accurate description. Jews had no institutional libraries. Ashkenazic Jews didn't have institutional libraries. Sephardic Jews didn't have institutional libraries. All libraries were personal. Even libraries in yeshivot, for instance, in Spain, the Abu Lafia yeshivot, which was supposed to have had a very large library. What we're talking about in yeshivot, in the Abu Lafia yeshiva, for instance, is a personal library. It's the personal library of the Abu Lafia family. All of the books were written out for personal use, and it's the idiosyncrasies of that particular family when we're talking about family libraries that are reflected in the contents of that library. There are also communal books, books that are written for synagogues, liturgical books, Torah scrolls, that type of thing. But even in those instances, it's a patron who actually owns those objects. So for instance, the Esslingen Machzor, which we're going to be talking about quite a bit today, is actually written out for a patron and owned by that patron. And presumably it stays in his house most of the year. And before the high holidays, it's brought to the synagogue, historically in Metz, where it was actually used as the liturgical text for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So that's the second assumption we have to get out of our heads. The question now is, how are these texts transmitted in an accurate and faithful way if there's no institutional oversight? There is nobody regulating what a text contains, what it doesn't contain, and what establishes that text. And it's a self-regulating culture. It's a self-regulating scribal culture. Jews are in this gray area where there are rabbis who function both as rabbis for a city and then perhaps also as scribes, rabbis who are educational rabbis, and in fact, rabbis who function as scribes and other things as well. There are cases of scribes who are also, for instance, shochetz, ritual slaughterers, mohalim, circumcisers, a whole variety of different kinds of gray areas. Is there a professionalized class of scribes? To some degree, it's a professional amateur class, right? It's like the Olympics, that level of skill, but technically, that's not their profession, most of them, which is really, really interesting. And so there has to be an internal and self-regulating culture where the learners of these texts are themselves overseeing the faithfulness of the text. So today what I'm showing you are 3 uncensored manuscripts. They're very unusual in that none of them, neither the Esslingen Machzor, which is as I said, a high holiday prayer book, or the Ubeda Idolatry Codex, which is a tractate of the Talmud and tractate of the Talmud that deals with idolatry. It's Avodah Zarah. Very unusual that it, in fact, was not censored. And then the third text, just remind me, what's the third text that I'm looking at today? I don't know why I'm blocking it right at this moment.
Sorry, hold on, I've got it. I just need to scroll down.
Yeah.
It's the Lutsky, the
Yeah. Of course. How could I forget? The third text is a Masoretic Bible. The Masoretic Bible itself, in fact, it's a Masoretic Bible copied from another very famous Masoretic Bible. What is a Masoretic Bible? A Masoretic Bible is a Bible that has the text of the Torah in codex form, meaning it's bound at the edge, and then it has the text itself is vocalized and also has cancellation marks. But what's really impressive is on the sides of the page, this vast sort of array of notes that are all around the text. That's not commentary. None of it is commentary. It's a critical apparatus designed to preserve the faithfulness of the text. The problem is if you have, sort of, you've written out the Bible, 10 times, 12 times, 20 times, once you actually make it all the way through that many times, you have lots of verses in your head. There are lots of verses that are similar, start out one way, right? And then end a different way. And so it's very easy to wind up writing the wrong thing. And so these Masoretic notes are actually designed to prevent scribes from making errors. And we'll talk about that more when we actually get to the text. So let's go down. Okay, so what's my central claim? My central claim is that the way that you preserve texts before print, meaning when they're writing it out by hand, is through a decentralized but self-regulating network of scribes and scholars. So what does that mean? Well, there's no central bureaucracy. As I said, there's nobody who's on oversight. So it's self-regulating. In other words, what happens is that scribes themselves see as part of their mission and part of their culture and part of their ethos and part of their esprit de corps as being, I have to preserve the text as faithfully as possible. In Sfarad, in Spain, the idea was to preserve it exactly as it was and make no changes. In Ashkenaz, it's a completely different in sort of Central Europe and in the Loire Valley and in Germany. The idea was to improve the text. If you see things that are obviously mistakes, to correct them. Those are two different approaches. They're both self-regulating approaches. And they're both about the culture of scribalism, not about an institutional oversight or decision-making. The scribe themselves is the one who's making that decision to try and preserve the text as best as possible. So I should say that this authority is conventional. What does that mean? It means that I have a place that I live. I live in Spain. I live in the city of Madrid. Or I live in, sort of the Rhineland. I live in Mainz, right? And I'm part of a syndicate. I'm part of a line of authority that goes up to the most important scribe, the most important rabbi in that area. And I see myself as being in that syndicate. I see myself as having lines of authority that come from that person, okay? So the thing that's so interesting about that is that it's local before the exiles. Like, for instance, the Jews are exiled from France in 1393. They're exiled from Spain in 1492. After that point, then we have Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. Before that, we have Ashkenaz and Sfarad. Everybody in Ashkenaz is a Jew. Everybody in Sfarad is a Jew. But there's no Jewish ethnicity before those exiles because the Ashkenazim live in Ashkenaz and the Sfaradim live in Sfarad. It's only after those exiles, when they're living in the same city, for instance, Amsterdam, that you have syndicates that people voluntarily affiliate with. And that then becomes the new syndicate and becomes a kind of voluntary association. So it goes from being conventional local. I'm in a local area, and it goes to being ethnic, and I have different kinds of affiliation. The ways that Jews affiliate with syndicates today, meaning they join a synagogue, that's how they would, for instance, do it in Amsterdam. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next place. So here we have some examples of medieval scribalism. These are the features. One is, I already mentioned, this idea of decentralization with a cohesion that's created by joining a syndicate, either being in a place that has, a network, or I affiliate with a network when I get to the new place. What we have here is the names of two of the scribes. You can see the colophon, the statement of credit, from the Codex Hilleli, the Masoretic Bible. And you can see here, this is a very famous scribe. He's probably the most famous scribe in 13th century Spain. His name is Yisrael HaSofer. He's the only scribe that we know in Spain who actually has that title, Yisrael HaSofer. And he gives the name of his father, who is Yitzchak, and the name of his grandfather, who is also Yisrael. So it says it says here, Ani, I am, Yisrael HaSofer, Bar Yitzchak, and he says that his father died, Nishmato Eden, whose soul is in paradise, Ben Yisrael. He's mentioned by a number of medieval commentators, for instance, Abravanel and others, as being this great scribe. And we know of his the lines of authority. He himself kind of establishes a syndicate in Spain and has lots and lots of students who he teaches to be scribes. The second piece is a shared form of language. What do I mean by shared form of language? Well, the hands themselves, right, the way they're shaped are different in different regions, but the ideas around those hands, the concepts that those hands are embedding, are the same in all three locations. So if you look here, I don't know if we can make this image larger, the second image on the page. But if you look at that image, perfect. You can see that there are three different scripts here. You have in the center a large square script, and you'll see that it has what look like three dots, I would describe it as a pile of cannonballs over each one of those words. That's highlighting. And that process of highlighting three dots as a way of emphasizing, right, of bolding, is a shared feature between different regions. The idea of these are also what are called capital letters. Very large square letters are capital letters in that they start sections. A capital is a chapter in Latin. Below that, you have small square script. Small square script actually provides you with information. This is the colophon, where in fact we get two pieces of information. We get the name, actually we get three pieces of information. We get the name of the scribe, which is Shlomo ben al-Bagli, right? He is a fascinating figure I'll talk about in a little bit, but he is not a professional scribe. We know that because he says, Katafti zela atmi. He writes, I wrote this book for myself, this tractate of the Talmud. I wrote it for myself so that I could study it. And then he says where he wrote it. He wrote it in the city of Ubeda, which is in central western Spain, it's a small little town. The reason he went there apparently is because there was a manuscript that he was copying from. At the top of the page, what you see is cursive script. It's actually a meaning the on the same piece. Yeah, what you here see is a semi-cursive script. The semi-cursive script is a rabbinic script. It's designed to show that the text is rabbinic. You may be familiar with Rashi script. Rashi script is also a semi-cursive script. What does cursive mean? Cursive means you don't take the pen off the page as you're writing. Semi-cursive means you take it off the page less. And so it's a quicker script to write. And the rabbinic texts tended to be written in those scripts. In this case, it is the text of the Talmud that's written in this script. And these kinds of concepts around particular types of writing are in fact very common features of medieval scribalism and a shared feature between the different Jews in different places. Okay, let's go down one more. There was a third thing on that page, though. Yeah, great. So this is the third piece, which is this idea of communal maintenance, that scribes themselves, patrons and scribes, felt themselves responsible for the faithful preservation of the text, either for its improvement as in Ashkenaz or its preservation exactly as they received it in Sfarad. In both cases, even though there's a difference culturally between the two locations, nonetheless, the feeling of responsibility is shared. And since there's no central authority, since it's, sort of decentralized and based on syndicates, everyone has to have shared responsibility. Kol Yisrael arevim ze lezeh. All Israel is responsible for each other. And that's actually what you get here, the same idea that we are responsible not only for each other, but we're responsible for the preservation of the Torah in a shared way as well, or of rabbinic tradition and liturgical tradition as well. Okay, and we're going to go down one more. Right, so this is a really fantastic page. This is the second page in the Esslingen Machzor, which is a liturgical text, a high holiday Machzor, as I mentioned. It's from the year 1290. It was written in Esslingen in southern Germany, but it was used mostly in Metz, which is in Alsace, on the kind of the boundary or border area between France and Germany. This you may recognize, right? Melech Yoshev al Kisei, right? So this is the end of what we call Nishmat Kol Chai, for the reshut, the introductory prayer before the morning service, or the last prayer in the preliminary service before the morning service. One of the fascinating things here that I'm trying to show is, number one, the layout. You can see that the text is laid out in a way in which there are capital letters at the top, so that people who are sitting in a relatively small synagogue, and it's a very large, like a monumentally large book. It's about the size of the wheel of an SUV, of a tire of an SUV. That it's that large. But these capital letters you can actually see. Now, if you look at that top line where the capital letters are, you can see an erasure. You can see that there's a space, too much space between Hamelech and Yoshev. There are 2 letters worth of space there. So you have Hamelech, the first word, right? That first large word. And then you have Yoshev, the second word, 2 letter spaces apart. And you can see a faded or an erased hey in that spot. And what's actually happened here is that someone has taken a knife and they have scraped off the ink and the surface layer of parchment, but they were unable to erase it completely. They were unable to completely excise it. What's the reason for this? The reason for this is that there was a different liturgical custom in Esslingen than there was in Metz. And when the book made its way from Esslingen and was eventually situated in Metz, the Chazan there, presumably, scraped off the letter to remind himself not to actually use the incorrect liturgical tradition, which is really, really fascinating. There are a number of other features here that are important to note. If you actually read through the text here, if you know the text well, which I'm sure some of you do, you'll see that these are not complete lines. You get about 30% of a line, and then it just stops, and then it goes to the next line. You're only getting the incipits, the very beginnings of the liturgical text, and that's because this is a part of the standard prayers. And what you're getting here is the beginnings, and then you Chazan have the capacity to say the rest from memory, and that actually ends up saving space. One of the fascinating things is that in what looks to be an 18th or 19th century hand on the side of the page, some Chazan in Metz has actually written out the entire text of the end of Nishmat Kol Chai. so that both the parts that were there and the parts that were not actually included are there. And you can see it, he writes it as a marginal note. That marginal note is not correcting anything. All it's doing is filling in the blanks to let him know, so that in case, that sometimes people get nervous as they're standing up in front of the congregation leading prayers. And so he wants to make sure that he doesn't draw a blank. I myself drew a blank on this on one of the texts earlier here, and I was very fortunate to have somebody reminding me what I was intending to talk about there. But so what you can see here, these marginal notes, there are glosses, which we're going to get to a little bit later as well, where the Hebrew is difficult and the Chazan actually writes in a simpler Hebrew word to explain, but we don't have that on this page because it's part of the standard prayers. Okay. Yeah, so what we're going to do now is we're probably going to take questions at this point because we're at 1:30. So I just want to give you a very brief preview of coming attractions in terms of what we're going to do after we answer the questions. We're going to go through some of the pages from the Esligan Machzor, which is, as I said, an Ashkenazic Machzor from 1290. We're going to go through some of the pages from the Ubeda Idolatry Codex, or the Ubeda Avodah Zarah Codex, which is a Sephardic Talmud manuscript from 1290, 1291. And it is a scholastic text. It's a text of the Talmud dealing with the laws of relations between Jews and non-Jews, idolatry, questions of wine. Non-kosher wine is not non-kosher because the food itself is from a prohibited source. Grapes are not a prohibited source, but instead because wine was regularly used in idolatrous worship. And so non-Jewish wine was prohibited because of the concerns of idolatry. And so all of that material is actually dealt with in this tractate of the Talmud as well. The third text that we're going to look at is this Masoretic Bible. It's often referred to as the Hilleli Codex. It has a very exciting name here, which is Lutsky 44a. Morris Lutsky was our cataloger in the early to mid 20th century of all of our biblical manuscripts. And he wrote an extraordinary catalog, a large and extraordinary catalog. And so this particular manuscript is the 44th plus. It's 44A because it's the first volume. This manuscript has 3 volumes, so it's 44A, B, and C. And so that's the name that it actually has in the catalog. Yeah, okay. So those are the things we're going to see. I'm going to talk about all of those things. We're going to talk about the images. And I think that I am 3 minutes over. So,
I mean, can't do much better than that. We have 2 kind of very quick questions. I'm going to ask them together so we can kind of keep it, because I know we want to get to the coming attractions. The first is super straightforward. Is the animal that we saw at the beginning with the Eslinger Machzor, is it a fire-breathing dragon? And I think probably there's this question of, there are dragons in Jewish books. And then there's a question about what is meant by rebalance a book. What do you mean when you talk about rebalancing a book? Is that the scraping off to change for specific liturgical changes, or is there something else in there?
Both of those are great questions. So the first piece is that, yes, dragons were very, very popular in the 13th century. It's a shared, illumination is a shared cultural sphere. You often have shared illuminations for similar purposes in Christian and in Jewish manuscripts. So one of the best examples, and I'm going to step away from the manuscripts that we're looking at, but it's a really interesting example, is that Latin Psalms texts often have little monsters, games, dogs chasing balls, hunting scenes, all kinds of things that are going to interest little boys. And the reason for that is that the Latin books of Psalms were used as primers to teach boys how to read in the Christian context. You see a very similar phenomenon among the Spanish Haggadot. The Spanish Haggadot are also full of games, grotesques, little monsters, flowering branches in the same way that the books of Psalms are. For instance, in a Christian context, that's not because the Haggadot are used to teach children to read. Instead, it's because there are children who may not be great readers at the table during Pesach. And so the goal is to have pictures that are going to entertain the kids as well. And so to that extent, it's a shared cultural sphere. And they're very similar images. In fact, there seems to have been sample books, model books that were used both for Haggadot and for Latin books of Psalms. So that's a really great example. This particular scribe, Kalanimus ben Yehuda, we know he liked dragons. He tended to make his lamids dragons. Is he making this like a sequential set of images where you have the dragon gradually breathing more and more fire? And so it's like a comic book with multiple panels. Maybe. I'm going to entertain that possibility a little later on, and I'm going to talk about it more extensively. But I think that's all I'm going to say about the dragons right now. In terms of the second question, which is about the term that I used is rebalance. That's not a technical term. In other words, what often happens when you receive a manuscript is it's not necessarily in the best condition, right? So sometimes pages go missing, they fall out over time, bindings break, different things happen over the course of time, especially if you're talking about a book that's around for several hundred years. So for instance, with the Esslingen Machzor, when it was in Metz, it had a binding that was a single binding, and that was fine. It could go up on the reader's stand, which was a very large stand, and it didn't matter that it was this massively monumental, heavy book. But once print came in, the idea of medieval manuscripts remained prestigious. Owning one was prestigious, and so the owner wanted to have a more manageable book. And so what he does is he split it in half and he put it into two bindings. So the two bindings are not in a logical place. It's in the middle of the Musaf Amidah for Yom Kippur. He splits, he breaks, he cuts the manuscript in half at exactly that point. And the result is that volume 1, it misses the end of Yom Kippur. You're kind of stuck fasting, and you never make it to Ne'ilah. Volume 2 begins halfway through Yom Kippur, so you don't get the first half of the fast. You get Ne'ilah very quickly, and then after that you get Sukkot, right? Does that make sense? It doesn't make any sense liturgically, but if you have it in a library and you just want to have 2 volumes for prestige, then it makes a lot of sense. One of the interesting things is whoever this person was, they sold off, or his sons perhaps inherited the 2 volumes, and they split the 2 volumes up. And so our volume of the Esslingen Machzor only goes through the midway point of Yom Kippur. There's a second volume that's in the Rosenthalia in Amsterdam, in the library in Amsterdam, that has the second half, and actually that's where the colophon that we're gonna see later on comes from. So what do I mean by rebalance? It's not a technical term. I think I was looking for a term that talks about repurposing, reimagining what a book can be given its new context, and that happened quite a bit after in the 16th and 17th centuries, when these books were still around, but people had stopped using them regularly as their main way of accessing these texts because they had printed books to look at.
So I think we're going to keep going just to make sure we get to the 3 different sources. So
yeah.
I'm going to turn it. Yeah.
Great. So let's go ahead. So the Esslingen Machzor is from 1290. It's the earliest Hebrew book that is located to Germany. We know it was written in Germany because the colophon, the statement of scribal responsibility at the end tells us that it was. It's also dated. And it is a massive book, and it is a huge investment. The scribe's name is Kalonymus ben Yehuda, and he probably is a scion of a very famous family, which is called the Kalonymus family, right? They're all named, by the way. There are only 3 names in the family for the men. They're Yehuda, Meshulam, and Kalonymus, and the 3 names repeat over a course of about 350 years. So he's a very prestigious scribe. We think of at least 2 more works of his. One is so, as I mentioned, the Rosentalia is the 2nd volume of this piece, but there's also one in Vossislav, which used to be Breslau, and there's one in Darmstadt, and they are also machzorim. And they share this same feature of the lamids being turned into dragons, which is really interesting. It's produced for public use. It's a patron who purchases it, who commissions it, and it's used that way. And its authority is conventional and collective, right? In other words, it's designed to reflect the custom in Esslingen, and then it's changed to reflect the custom in Metz, which have different liturgical traditions, which is fascinating. We'll talk about the colophon, but there's a little bit of humor in the colophon as well, where he writes a blessing formula saying that he and all Israel should be protected against any harm until, right, for as long as a camel can't walk down a ladder, which means forever, because camels can't walk down ladders, which is a fascinating thing. We'll see that. Okay, let's go down. Great. So let's make this image big. Yeah, but entire. Perfect. So one of the fascinating things about this is that it's from southern Germany. So this is obviously an architectural depiction. We call this an arch page. And it's traditionally, or I should say traditionally, the way that scholars historically have referred to this particular page is that it's supposed to be some kind of a cathedral, perhaps. I don't think that's what's actually going on. I think that this is actually supposed to be a castle. It looks more like a castle to me, and I'll explain why in just a second, and also what the difference is between a cathedral and a castle. But if you look at the architecture itself, you'll see that it has both Romanesque and also Gothic features. So those arches, right? The arches with the pointed arches, right, where they join in what looks like a kind of a spear point at the top and at the sides. That's Gothic, right? A Romanesque arch is rounded. But if you look down at the bottom, at the lions, those are not Gothic lions. Those are Romanesque lions. You can see the kind of curly-haired manes of the lions, the segmented manes. That's very much a Romanesque style. So what's going on here is that the particular artist is influenced by both, and that makes sense. That matches up with Esslingen. So the scribe did not do this particular piece of art. Somebody else in Esslingen did, but it's certainly done in Esslingen and not in Metz because of the hybrid nature of the architecture, which means that before it left Esslingen, it already had this arch page. The other piece of this, in terms of what is a castle versus what is a cathedral. So a cathedral is a building that has primarily a liturgical purpose. It's a seat of religious authority, whereas a castle is a seat of political and military authority. And it is a castle is ultimately a building that's a weapon. It's a fortress. If you look at what are often taken to be windows in the towers at the top of the roof of this archway, you'll see that they're not actually windows. They're actually what are called aeroloops, that you have concrete pillars that are placed inside or stone pillars that have been carved out of living stone in the windows to create a protective kind of barrier for archers who were shooting from the windows. If you look at the lions, there are 4 lions. They're at the capitals of the 2 pillars and then 2 below. All the lions are rampaging. 2 are regarding, but they're all rampaging. The sign of the rampaging lion is a military. It means it indicates that is a military symbol. It indicates that you're ready, you're prepared for battle. If you look in the spandrels is the spaces that are created between and on the outside of the columns. You see on the outside of the columns there are 2 dragons, and on the inside of the columns you have 2 eagles ascending, and those are also military symbols. The dragons are guarding, meaning their heads are turned, and they are guarding against encroaching enemies. If you look at now that leads us to the text. The text in the center is Melech Azur Gvura, God who is robed in might. God is the king robed in might. And this is, I think, about what is at this point still a Carolingian emperor, not being the king of the world. Christianity is not ultimately the greatest source of power in the world. The greatest source of power in the world is God, and this is God's fortress that you're entering into. And so there's a feeling of divine protection, I think, that this is supposed to convey. God robed in might on the day of judgment, judging all the nations. And that's actually what this conveys, I think. Okay. So here are our dragons. Yeah, so there are multiple things going on here that are fantastic. First of all, in terms of the original program of design here, this is not an artist. This is the scribe. Kalanimus ben Yehuda likes to turn his lamids into dragons. And I think part of it is because he could, because he was good at it, because it's an individual signature. This is not a typical thing to turn lamids into dragons, but it's something that he liked to do. You can also see that at the very top of the page, there's a puff of smoke coming, and that as you go down the page, it appears to me that this is supposed to be in the refrain, which is Imru Lelohim, right? Give praise to God. The repeated refrain also is kind of a repeated blast of fire from the mouth of the dragon, and you actually get the largest blast of fire at the very end. There's no dragon present because there's no lamed present in that last line, because you actually only have a total of 5 refrains on the page. In terms of the original layout, what you actually have here is a piyut. The way that this particular piyut, this particular liturgical poem worked, is that the refrain is the same, and then there's kind of a riddling text where if you listen closely, it's supposed to clue you in on what the communal refrain actually is. And if you listen closely and you pay attention, you can get to the end, you can figure out what it is you're supposed to say. Now you're going to say to me, wait a second, we say this year after year, year after year. How do I not know the refrain after, 15 years of reciting the same liturgical poem? That's true, but originally, meaning centuries before this machzor was produced, the first time that this piyut was actually produced, it was produced for a single occasion, and then it became very popular and was incorporated into the Ashkenazic machzor later. The interesting thing here is in terms of the actual glosses that are written by later Chazanim, is apparently it was shared knowledge that the last line was a refrain that was said by the kahal, by the community, it was either not so clear how it was they were supposed to recite it, or knowledge was lost, and the Chazan actually writes in a kind of cursive script, Kof He Lamed Kahal, before the parts that the community, the Kahal, is supposed to recite together, which is actually really interesting as well. I did also mention that in the 13th century, dragons were really, really popular, and it's true. There are fads. I don't know what to say. There's the way that memes work, is that they're the smallest part of culture that's shared. There's a proliferation of dragons, both amongst Jews and Christians, in their manuscripts in the 13th century. And a lot of it has nothing to do with the text. It's just people got really into dragons in the 13th century.
Dragons are really popular now too, Morty. It's a
So
thing.
we don't put dragons on everything we write, but in the 13th century they were. And it only
Um,
lasted about 60 years, and then it stopped.
I'm thinking we might want to go down to the Avodah Zarah Codex just so we
Exactly.
can. Okay.
Oh, so this is the colophon. I already mentioned this thing about the camel, but you can see the colophon. One thing I do want to mention is just that the name of the original patron was erased out to such an extent that there's a little hole, and his name is missing, which is fantastic. Whoever bought it didn't want that person's name in it. Okay. The Avodah Zarah manuscript, I already talked about this a little bit, about Shlomo al-Bagli here, and the fact that he wrote it out for himself. One of the fascinating things about him here is he's a machine. If you look at his script, I didn't really mention it before, but look at the way that his lines are exactly straight, how all of his letters are so close to being together. Meaning that they are identical in their form. The alepphs look the same on that large square text. The lameds are exactly the same size. The ayins, everything is made exactly the same. That's not only true with regard to the square text, it's true with the cursive text as well. It's very, very important to him to get everything exactly right. I don't know how he was able to do this, and also simultaneously copy out this manuscript in 2 different locations with a limited amount of time. Why do I say 2 different locations? Because the grammar and the style of the manuscript changes about halfway through. We can see there's a point where he starts using a different exemplar, a different manuscript that he's copying from. So for instance, the word sefa, which means end, it's an Aramaic word in the first part, becomes sofa, which is a more Hebraicized version in the second half. So he's using 2 different pieces. He's gone to different places to get the piece. The other thing about this manuscript that's fascinating is that he's using little booklets. He has parchment on the outside of these gatherings of pages and paper on the inside. It seems like he's making little notebooks that he's carrying around to copy the Talmud manuscripts from, and then putting them together. And he says explicitly it's for his own use, which is really incredible. Yeah, let's go to the next one. Yeah, so I want to talk about the Masoretic Bible here. Very briefly, I mentioned this idea of wording here. There are 2 different types of Masoretic texts that are wording, that protect the text. At the top and the bottom, what you have are catchwords. These are words where you have the exact same 2 or 3 words appearing in other parts of the Bible, and there'll be a little circle next to the word in the text itself, and that'll take you to a lemma, a dibur hamatchil, a word that's quoted from the text, and then you get the other verses. They don't use chapter and verse because chapter and verse haven't been invented yet. They're not invented until chapter and verse, until 15th century Paris, although Jews adopted very, very early on. So that's one type of protection, is just you can see the other text, and that's metacognitive. If I show you the other texts, you're not going to make the mistake. The other piece that we have here on the sides of the page are what are called correlative Masorah, which are lists of the same word, lists of the same form, lists of the same words appearing in the same verse and those are on the side of the page, and you can see that they look like lists. And those are actually really interesting as well. I do want to show you one thing here. There, believe it or not, there is an illustration on this page. It is not micrography. There is some micrography in this manuscript, but meaning small writing in the image of in creating pictures. This is a different kind of illustration. If you look at the very last line of the large text, right? You can see here the text is God caused the water of the sea to turn back on them, meaning on the Egyptians, right? And the children of Israel walked in the dry land in the midst of the sea. In Ashkenazic texts, what was very common was that in that last line, there'd only be a single opening, right? This brick layer structure, Ashkenazim and Sephardim both used, but Sephardim added a second space. You can see a second space before the last word in the verse. So if you look at the words, the first word and the last word, the way it's been arranged is Hayam, the sea. So the sea at the beginning and the sea at the end. And then in between, Uvnei Yisrael halchu b'yabasha batoch. And the children of Israel walked on the dry land in the midst. So what you actually have here is the sea split and the children of Israel walking in the midst of the sea. And that was something that was innovated in Spain. I mentioned before how there is a more conservative scribal culture in Spain where they want to preserve the text exactly and not make corrections, and that's true. At the same time, the layout of the text here, they're much more creative than Ashkenazim. And after kind of the Sephardic influx to Italy after 1492, Ashkenazic Jews in Italy and northern Italy, in Padua and in Venice, start writing their Sifrei Torah with this second space at the end of the line. And then that spreads up into Ashkenaz, all Ashkenazic, or, aside from the historical ones, but all Ashkenazic Sifrei Torah written after the middle of the 17th century, roughly, take this form as well. And so all of our Sifrei Torah today have this particular form as well. Okay. Great. So I think I already talked about Masorah. I think I talked about it enough that I don't have to actually talk about that. Let's
get to your kind of revolutionary statement here.
Yeah. So let's move on here. So what's the gains and the loss? The loss is that the text becomes stable and you don't have kind of this communal enterprise, kind of this wiki text. You have once there isn't any diversity in the text of the Talmud, for instance, any longer. You actually have a very set text because people just start copying what the printed text was and resetting the exact same text. You also have commentaries on the page, which you didn't have previously, and that's actually a very good thing. The spread of information is actually a very good thing. But I do want to talk about this next piece, which is really the most important piece, I think. So let's go down one more here. Okay. So there's a very important book that was published in the 1970s, in 1979, Elizabeth Eisenstein's The Print Revolution. She states that, and I think she may be overstating a little bit, but it's basically true, that there's a communications revolution that reshaped people's access and authority to information, and that created the fact that there's access because of print created the revolution in literacy education and made for the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, right? The Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific method. That the result of that is challenges to institutions, particularly institutions like the Catholic Church, which had hierarchies which preserve the fidelity of the text. And so standardization and accuracy is a big one, that during the Middle Ages, there was amongst the scriptoria lots of inaccurate texts because it's basically a factory setting, and people are given a task with a job that they kind of have to do, and there's no internal sense of self-regulating accuracy. And so what you actually have with printers is they're they need to make money. It's a business, and there's a profit motive for accuracy. And so the level of accuracy in the text goes up because of the profit motive. It's also one of the elements in kind of the creation of serial production and capitalism, large-scale capitalism. The fall of feudalism is in a lot of ways the result of serial production as well. So print's momentum not only persists through modernity, which is the way she puts it. I would say that actually the information revolution that we're living in now is really part of the same revolution. In other words, the challenges to authority, the spread of information, the increase in communications, the spread of capitalism, unfettered capitalism, all of those things, they result from the print revolution. But the Jewish counterpoint is not that. In fact, it's the opposite effect, right? So instead of kind of rupture, what print does is it increases the same networks. It's the same networks and syndicates that exist that Jews already have that allows for the distribution of print books. In other words, it's reinforcing, and it reinforces the idea of Jewish, sub-ethnic affiliation and ideological affiliation. I think to some degree, the syndicates expand because of the advent of print, and people can affiliate with smaller and smaller subgroups, and you have the proliferation of synagogues and eventually denominations as the result of these kinds of syndicates. Authority was already decentralized. It's just that it was accelerated by the existence of print and the existence of ongoing self-reinforcing networks. The effect it has within denominations is ironic in that it centralizes authority, right? Once you actually have a denomination, you can print an official prayer book. And instead of having local customs and local syndicates, you actually have a top-down regulated kind of set of authorities who say, this is what we do, we don't do that. And that's, by the way, both within Orthodoxy and outside of it as well. The fact that you have, for instance, a union prayer book in the United States, or a Silverman Machzor in the United States, are statements of official gushpanka, of an official kind of hechsher that you put on your what does he call that? A rubber stamp that you put on your text. And so the democratic and self-regulating process is weakened, deeply weakened, and Jews, I think, don't feel the same kind of personal responsibility to themselves ensure the fidelity of the text. And in fact, what happens is there's a greater looseness about the quotation of biblical texts and the kind of a freedom, I guess you would say, and simultaneously a kind of stricture, meaning a freedom amongst authorities and a stricture amongst people to say every word exactly as it is in the particular prayer book or in the particular liturgical book or the particular book of the Talmud, for instance. And you can't tolerate different versions, which is actually really fascinating. I think that's very revealing. It reveals that technical revolutions aren't necessarily universal in their impact, and that you can have different groups within the societies that react differently to these major technological changes, and that we ignore that kind of level of diversity, and I say diversity very pointedly, at our peril. And that's where I'm going to end.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schwartz. I know you have a meeting right now, but so I think we'll leave it. If people have comments they want to make, I'm happy.
I can take one question. I can take one question. How about that?
Okay. So, and I will say that many of our questions are very much micro questions about kind of the realm of, that there's like these fascinating smaller things. But I think there's this kind of question ongoing that many of them are, like, who is it? Like, how can there possibly be an authority when you're this decentralized and you're this, how can there be this kind of evolution? When does modern text readable script start? How are, what are the ways in which all of these
Right.
different universes are connected in order to produce something that stays so uniform, even with these distinctions?
So we don't know, we don't have records of what the levels of literacy amongst Jews actually were. We just don't know. There's an ongoing debate, and people have tried to show evidence in a variety of different ways based upon the numbers of texts that are actually out there. It's not terribly helpful because the Talmud, for instance, was burned so many times in the Middle Ages. We know that there were, hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of Talmud manuscripts in Europe. Today we have 68 extant complete manuscripts of at least one tractate of the Talmud. That's a tiny, tiny number. We don't know how many there actually were. We don't know how many liturgical texts there were because Jews tended to use the liturgical texts up. There's this massive gap of almost no manuscripts from the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls until, sort of around the 13th century. And why is that? That's because the texts that tended to survive, and the numbers go up, by the way, until you get to the 15th, the texts tended to survive the closer they were in the age of creation to print, because it meant that Jews stopped using them and they used printed books instead, and then they survived. They didn't claw them to death by using them so frequently.
Because they became treasured objects as opposed to an
Correct.
object of use.
It's on the shelf in a library rather than in a Beit Midrash where it's ripped apart. I was the Beit Midrash director here at JTS for 10 years before I started in the library. And I can't tell you the difference between books in a Beit Midrash and books in a library. Books in a Beit Midrash, you have to, so for instance, one of the things I would do every single year as the director of the Beit Midrash is buy a new set of Tanakhs, a brand new set, because they got destroyed over the course of the year. We would buy 10 to 15 Tanakhs every single year to sit in the Beit Midrash. They get stolen, they get destroyed, and we'd have to buy new ones every single year. And in the library, the books are taken off the shelf if they're damaged a little bit, and they're taken to conservation, and they're repaired, and they're rebound, and they're cared for. And that is not the case in a Beit Midrash where they're kind of used to death, which is really, really fascinating. So anyway, yes, I do have to go.
Thank you. Again, we'll share your contact information in the chat if people have questions. I have some questions that they had that we'll put into your kind of pantheon of questions that people have about library things. I shared in the chat, there's an online version of the Grolier exhibit if you're not in New York that you can check out, and they've have pictures of many of the things and and the captions, I think. Which is so helpful for those of us who can't, and even those of us who are in New York who maybe it's just not accessible. So thank you very much. We'll continue with this revolutionary journey next week with Dr. Robbie Harris. He's going to be talking about Pshat as a revolution. And I'm delighted as always to see you, and thank you guys so much for joining us. Thanks, Morty.
Pleasure.